Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn, and in this video we're going to talk about making custom healing abutments. Now, there's lots of options for doing this, but one of the really cool things that you can do now with the automatic tooth segmentation and bone segmentation is you can actually use a tooth that's going to be extracted and build a custom abutment that is literally the exact shape of that tooth. So that's going to really help support the gingiva, ensure you don't get gingival collapse. So let's go ahead and jump into this. All I've done at this point is open the patient CT. So the first thing we're going to need to do is bring in the STL file. So usually you would be prompted for this as soon as you open the case. But since I already have the case open, I can just go to File, Import STL. And as soon as you import it, it's going to ask you, is this a maxilla or a mandible? This is going to be a maxilla because we're doing tooth number 9. So I'll click maxilla and then let it do the auto stitch. Alright, and so you can see the auto stitch has happened, and I always like to verify that it is a good stitch, and as you can see the model outlines look really well adapted. Um, so I'm happy with the stitch. I usually will also look here in the axial slice, and again you can see that the adaptation looks really good. Alright, so let's look at what we're going to be doing on this case. So tooth number 9 has got some apical infection. You can see it here in this cross-sectional image. And so that tooth needs to come out, and there's going to be an immediate implant placed, and the idea here is let's try to immediately temporize it. Now, if you had the primary fixation, you could do the entire crown. If you didn't, you could just trim off that pre-made crown down to the gingival level so that the implant can heal undisturbed, and it will basically be a custom tissue former. But the process is the same either way. It's just a matter of how much you trim off of that. All right, so first step, we need to go ahead and place the implant. So I'm going to go up here to add an implant. And in this scenario, for an immediate implant, I really like the Fortes. They have the more aggressive thread pattern. And knowing that we're going to have to go long to get some apical engagement, we'll probably start with a 3/7 by 13 and just see how that fits in there. On the abutment, you can go up here and I'm going to add a custom abutment, and usually I'll do a 20 millimeter long and diameter 2.63, something like that. I like to do a 2.6 because that's about the ideal screw access hole. And later in this process we might actually be you know uh, what's the word, Boolean extracting a screw hole through this crown, and so I'm going to make this 2.6. Alright, so drop that in anywhere in the case that you would like, and then you can start doing your refinement in, I usually do it in this axial slice, because this is really the only slice in which you can uh, spin that implant on its axis and see it from all the different dimensions. So as you can see here, just by turning the scroll wheel on the mouse, I can look at this implant from the facial, I can look at it in cross section, and ideally I would like to have a lingualized screw access hole, but just given the position of the tooth, I don't think that's going to happen here. And so if I can come out through the incisal edge, I know that's going to be perfectly set up for a custom abutment. We could also do an angulated screw channel tie base if you were intent on doing a screw retained crown. So lots of options there. And I'm going to always go a little bit apical to where the bone is currently, because I expect almost to have just a little bit of bone dieback in the process of the surgical procedure, the extraction, and all that. So I want to go a little bit apical to where the current bone levels are. All right. And then let's give this a spin and make sure we like it from all the different dimensions. I think this could probably be uprighted and come over just a hair. Alright, so I like that implant position. I think we will go with that. Alright, so now if I wanted to make a custom healing abutment that is literally a match of this current tooth, alright, we've obviously got the crown of the tooth here, okay, but we don't have the root of the tooth. And so it would be very helpful if we had the root form. That way we could know exactly how to emerge out with the profile of the custom tissue former to match that root. And so let's go into the Model Master module, because in the Model Master module we have the segmentation panel. All right, so here is segmentation, and you've got a couple options here. So I'm going to show you two options, and it just really is up to you which one you prefer to do. All right, I've hidden the implant for a second. You've got an option to do automatic tooth segmentation. So if you're just wanting to do it quick and dirty and not have to wait on anything, choose automatic tooth segmentation, and now we can go to select tooth, and then you're going to want to come up and click in this cross-sectional window on what tooth you want to segment. All right, so if I click there, you can see that it has segmented that root, and it happens very quickly. And you can scroll through and see how segmentation did. We can look at it in the tangential window and spin this around. All right, and then you've got the option to further edit this segmentation. So if I felt like there was a little bit of this that was missed, I could go in and modify that. As I'm looking at this, I'm thinking this is just the tiniest bit inside of where the actual root is. You can see the contour right here. So you've also got this option to inflate what the segmentation was. So watch what happens when I click inflate, and I'm going to zoom in here close where you can see. So it's going to basically go one voxel in every direction and expand that selection. All right, and to me this looks like it's better adapted to what that tooth actually is. All right, so I like the segmentation. We could just simply now create a surface. And as you notice here, we've got a segmented tooth. All right, now given that this does have a PFM crown on it, I don't expect for that tooth to be, perfectly adapted up there, because the scatter from the crown is going to make this not be as perfect. All right, now here's a bonus for this case. So let's say that you literally wanted to adapt this tooth where you've got exactly the clinical crown of this, like from the intraoral scan. All right, that's actually something we could do. Um, what I'm going to do right now to do that is just hide this tooth, and I'm going to also duplicate the intraoral scan. All right, so let's hide the original one. And now that I've got this duplicate, what I want to do is simply cut away everything except this tooth. All right, won't alter my original intraoral scan. So I can do that. Since we're still here in Model Master, I can go to Model Edit, and let's use the selection brush. All right, and I'm going to go right around the gingival margin and just paint in. Now you'll have to hold Shift to activate this tool. So I can let go of Shift, reorient my model, and then hold Shift again. And I just want to go right beyond the gingival margin of the tooth, and we're going to just delete all this. Okay, so as you can see, I've selected all the way around the tooth, and I'm going to just simply cut out that selected area. And now that that's done, you can see this is entirely separated from the rest of the model. Go to your surfaces panel, and you can, let's change this color too, just so we can see that we're on a different thing. All right, so if I click up here in the STL surfaces, I can now say isolate, and I just want to keep that crown of the tooth. All right, and so now we have the crown of that tooth. All right, and then furthermore, if I go back into model editing, I could select the holes. Actually, let's just where is it? All right, close all holes. Okay, and as you can see here, now that is a solid model. Furthermore, you could use the smoothing brushes, smooth that out a little bit, anywhere that it kind of looks a bit rough. All right, so as you can see here, I've got just the crown of that tooth. Now, hypothetically, if I wanted to merge that with this, we could do that. All right, so anywhere that, again, remember the only reason I'm showing this is because if I wanted to exactly make that crown shape match, I'm not able to do it here simply because the PFM is generating so much scatter. All right, so what we can do is join these things together, but I want to, before I do that, I want to get rid of any of this area on the segmented root that is artificially too big. All right, now we know the intraoral scan is accurate, so we could simply take this and now on the tooth, we could just delete some of this. So I'm using the shrink brush here, and I'm just shrinking back the tooth. Depending on how much of it there is to do, you could probably also use the smooth tool. All right, so notice here I'm just smoothing that away. And I'd basically like to just kind of merge these into a smooth, continuous contour. All right, so we've got a smooth, continuous model with the real crown of the tooth, with the real root of the tooth, and got rid of the distortion from that scatter. But right now they're two separate STLs, right? And so how could we make these one? A couple of ways we could do it. We could go into Crown and Bridge and do a Boolean union. Another simple one that a lot of people don't realize they can do is you can just simply go to File, Export Data, and normally we would just export data here, but there's also this function here to create a surface, right? So if I just take each of those and just now create a surface, notice that it's created this new file. It's going to be called combined. And so I'm going to call this ideal number 9. All right. And if I was to hide these, you can see now that's just one model. Ideal root, we could look at that in cross section. And you can see it's got the ideal crown as well from the intraoral scan. All right. Now, the other way you could have done this, you could still merge these things all together, but while we're here in Model Master, let me just show it real quick and I'll time lapse it. But under your segmentation stuff, we could have also gone here and done automatic jaw segmentation. And in this case, let's just say do the maxilla and don't merge the teeth with the jaws. So this would take about 3 minutes, but this would get you all of the roots, but it will also get you the maxilla. And so I'm going to do that again. I'll time lapse it. Okay, so that option took about 2 minutes, but again, the benefit here is that it does each individual root, but now you can see I've got the maxilla as well. So I'm going to simply click Next and finalize this. All right, so I like to actually have this maxilla model. All the individual teeth I don't really need here. We're just doing a single implant, and so I've already got an ideal number 9 from the process we showed earlier, but we could have just as easily done that same thing at this point. Once again, we've got a segmented root. Crown's a little inaccurate, so we could have merged that with the intraoral scan crown like I've already shown, but I'm going to go ahead and just delete all these teeth because, again, I've already got what I want there. All right, so now I got what I want. And remember, I've already planned the implant as well. And so you'll kind of see. Let's jump back into the implant module, and you'll be able to appreciate better the contours of the bone and the implant placement and all that kind of stuff. All right, so now you can really make out the socket contours and all of that much easier, as well as the contour of the gingiva beyond that. And so that, in my opinion, that really helps me a lot in visualizing this contour that's going to need to be generated to emerge out to this gingival margin, right, and that crown form, assuming we're going to use this exact same shaped tooth that they currently have, right? If not, it would be merging out to its wax up. All right, so I like my implant position. I'm going to go ahead and lock that. But we're going to need to put on some kind of a tie base to visualize that emergence, right? Because this is going to be best fabricated on some kind of a tie base restoration. All right, so before I do that, remember how I told you earlier that I usually will make this be a 2.6 millimeter custom abutment? I'm going to go ahead and create a surface out of that that I'll later on be able to Boolean subtract from this tooth that we're making. And so that may not be intuitive why I'm doing that just yet, but let's go ahead and just do that real quick. So in the same way I just did, uh, you know, that model, I'm going to go into export data, but I'm going to turn everything off except for that abutment, and I'm just going to create a surface out of it. And I'm going to name that 2.6 screw channel. All right, and that can be hidden now. Okay, so the reason I did that at this point is because now I need to actually put on a tie base instead of this custom abutment, and I don't want to have to change back to it again later. So I'm going to right click, say replace this abutment. And this time, instead of a custom abutment like I've got on here currently, let's go to select an abutment. And what that's going to do is bring up all of the potential abutment options for this Forte implant. And so, you've got a 1.8 tie base. Let's look at what that would be like. All right. And I actually kind of like that. That just gets me up and out of the bone, as you can see right here. So here's your bone contour, and that just gets me out of the bone. And then we can develop an emergence that will kind of mimic the existing anatomy of this tooth and emerge out to this gingival margin. So I like that one. That's the one I'm going to go with. So now what I'm going to do is just hide this maxilla, and let's look here because we need to modify this tooth to basically merge into that tie base. So for starters, I'm going to just turn up the transparency on it just so I can see what's going on underneath. And now that we've made it transparent, we can start modifying this tooth. All right, so part of the question is, how fancy do you want to get with this? Do you want this thing to come out of the printer perfect and you don't have to modify it whatsoever? That'll take a little bit more effort. If you just want to do something kind of quick and dirty, you could just come up here and use your cut tool, all right, and just make a cut across here, all right, and now you've got this shape. If we just Boolean subtracted this tie base from it and the screw channel, then you could print this object. And all you would need to do, I mean, you'll clearly be able to see where the margin emerges to the tie base, is just taper down this little bit of area right here so that you don't have this, immediate ledge out to it. Make a smooth flowing contour down to this. All right, so that's one option. Let me undo that. Other option, we could go ahead and try to get this thing as close to perfect as possible before sending it to print. And so just since it's a tutorial, I'll show you that option. I'm still going to cut off portion of it. Let's go to cut, and I'm going to look right through that connection. Now, I would not recommend you go right to the platform. I would suggest you come, a few millimeters up above it, because the way these smoothing tools are going to behave, it's going to not uh, work as well if you cut all the way to the platform already. All right, so remember, where do we use those smoothing tools for a general model? Those are going to be in Model Master. I know I'm jumping back and forth between modules a lot. But now on this tissue former, select that in your selection, and now let's use this smoothing brush. And we can just begin to smooth this thing back. I'm going to turn up the strength quite a bit here. So you can see when you've cut on a surface, that smoothing tool is very aggressive, and that's why I think it's better to not have cut all the way to the platform of the tie base right off the bat. All right, and now just with the transparency on, you can start to see here where you need to taper this thing back. All right, I think that's good enough. I could smooth this up more, but again, you can always print this thing and do a little fine tuning by hand if you need to. There's no need to be absolutely perfect with this. Okay, so at this point, we need to basically just turn this into a custom tissue former. If you want, you can look over it in all of your slices and make sure that you like the profile of it. So I want to look at it relative to the maxilla and see how things are looking. All right. So I'm envisioning what will this blue contour look like after that abutment is subtracted out. All right. So I like that. Again, you don't want to make this profile go straight out because you're almost creating like a reverse platform switch when you do that. Smooth tapering, and it only gets out to its full diameter once it's out here on the gingival margin, which is right there. Again, that came from the intraoral scan. Okay, so now we just need to basically subtract everything from this. So we can subtract the tie base, and we can do Boolean functions. Obviously, you could export this and do this in Mesh Mixer or another program, but you do have Boolean functions within Blue Sky Plan. Let's go to Crown and Bridge module. And under the teeth editing panel, you can see it'll probably be collapsed like this, but when you open that up, you've got the option to do a Boolean difference. So let's choose to do a Boolean difference between the blue tissue former model, and then what do we want to subtract? We want to subtract this yellow abutment. So right here, and we probably want to create a bit of an offset, okay? Because remember, if you merely did a subtraction, that's not going to go in there. Even think about with your surgical guides. If when you make a guide, it's building in a 0.2 offset spacer so that your guide will sit down passively. You're going to need to do the same here. So I would probably say add about a 0.2 offset spacer, and now let's apply that and see what happens. All right, and as you can see, it has created a new surface. And so in order to visualize that, we're going to need to turn off the blue one. So let's hide that. And let's make this transparent too. So if I right click it and say add transparency, do you see how it's built in a spacer around that tie base? All right. And you're going to bond this on, so if you have a tiny marginal gap or something, that's not really something we're concerned with. All right, but what it didn't do, because again, this is not a traditional workflow where, we tell it, hey, we're gonna design a crown on a tie base. Remember, because you've got to use a library tooth to do that, and we're using the patient's own tooth. Okay, so that'll get there one day, but right now it's not. So we're just doing this with straight up Boolean subtractions, and as a result, we've got this, and we don't have a screw access hole. Now, could you just print this and then make an access? Sure, easy enough. You can absolutely do that. But you remember earlier when I had on that 2.6 millimeter custom abutment and I went ahead and created a surface out of it? Now, if you neglected to do that at this point, you could just, change your abutment back to a 2.6 custom abutment and then create a surface out of that and subtract it. But I've already done it, right? So remember, I've got this here. So now what would I get if I simply subtract that from this? I'll end up with a 100% custom tissue former immediate load crown if I wanted to use it in its full contour. So let's do that. Let's do a Boolean difference between this new surface and the 2.6 screw channel. All right, I don't need to create an offset here because 2.6 is already a hair bigger than it needs to be. So let's apply that. And once again, it's going to create a new surface, but you'll have to hide the original to be able to see it. And there you got it. All right, so I just want you to kind of visualize here what you've achieved. You've now got a custom tissue former that is an exact replica of the patient's existing tooth, right? But not only of the crown, but it merges down into their exact same root form. And we could visualize this in the cross sections, right? You see how that merges right down to those tie base platforms, and I do still have a little bump you would have to smooth up on that. But still, though, this is a really nice way to get exactly the same anatomy. So there's no way that if you were to place this implant and install this, there's no way that papilla can collapse because it's the exact same anatomy as their tooth. All right. Now it's probably overcomplicating it for most cases, I'll grant you, but there's a time and place for it. Anterior cases are very aesthetically demanding. There's no room for error, and so there's times you want to take the extra time to make sure you absolutely nail it. All right. So that's what we've accomplished. And then just one other thing to point out, not every case do you need to do immediate loading. And so let's suppose that you just wanted truly a tissue former, not an immediate load crown. Well, very simple. Either print it in its full contour and then lock this off, or if you wanted to just go ahead and do it on the front end because you know you're not going to immediate load, you don't need much beyond the gingival margin. So you could just trim this to exactly the gingival margin. Oops. And I'm going to make the intraoral scan be a little bit transparent so I can see what's going on underneath. And we could simply use our cut tool to cut this thing down. I wouldn't go all the way down to the gingiva. I'd leave a little bit of it sticking up. So let's select our tissue former, use the cut tool, and I would also leave a little bit over the top of the tie base. And if you wanted to further contour this, you can. And now you would just have a tissue former, not a full screw retained crown, but with perfect anatomy. And that way, if you were going to do a flipper or some other type of temporary in the short term, then knock yourself out. You can do that. Okay. In fact, just for giggles, let's let's use our newfound knowledge in the Boolean functions and everything. What if we wanted to create a tissue, or I'm sorry, an intraoral scan model that had that tooth extracted from it? Can we do that? Sure. All you got to do is, once again, in your crown and bridge module, let's do a Boolean subtraction between this model and what do we want to subtract? We want to subtract the ideal tooth number 9. If you want to build in an offset, you can. Let's maybe say do a 0.2 offset on that as well. All right, it's going to generate this new model. So when that tooth is extracted, this is exactly the anatomy that's going to be present. You could do your implant fully guided so that you know it's going to end up right there. And then you could have your custom tissue former that you've created. All right. So I'm showing lots of options. Obviously, I've gone way overboard with this because I'm just trying to show you all the possibilities that exist. But really, it's you're limited only by your imagination. You can get as fancy with this as you want, or you could just simply segment the root, lop it off at the tie-based platform, print that, and just hand contour it. And in reality, that's probably what I would do, as opposed to spending all this time. But um, all those options exist. So anyway, hopefully you found this helpful and learned some of the new features in Blue Sky that maybe you hadn't known about. All right, thanks.